Good afternoon. We're back with more DC Dual Force, and today will be a tier list for the Might cards, the common and rare cards. That would be the silver and blue ones. We've already taken a look at the legendary and ultimate tier cards in previous videos. That would be the purple and gold ones. So this will be a tier list for the remaining Might cards, which are common or rare. And we will do the same for the other factions in future videos. So let's get started. There are 40 cards in total from the Might faction that we have not looked at yet. Just go in alphabetical order, and they'll be in order of how often we're going to want to include them in decks. The S tier cards will be cards that will be included in nearly every Might deck that we make. The A tier cards will be included in most decks, and the B tier cards occasionally. The C tier cards less often, and the D tier cards almost never included in decks. So first up, we've got A Better Tomorrow. Give recruits in your deck +1/+1. So this is a slow card because you don't get anything for it right away. You don't have any effect on the recruits on the board, and you don't have any effect on the recruits in your hand. You just affect the recruits that you may draw from your deck later. For a lot of bronze resource cards, if you were to play a recruit, you could expect to get 2/3 in stats plus an ability, or even 3/3 in stats, something like that. So to get that from A Better Tomorrow, we would have to play it and then draw 3, maybe 4 recruits in the future that we would then want to play. So clearly, if you draw this card in the very late game, it's a terrible card because you won't have time to draw 3 or 4 recruits and then play them. And in the late game, you're often desperately hoping for gold or silver tier cards to come out of your deck. We would really never be happy to see A Better Tomorrow in the late game, so the perfect use for it would be in the early game in a recruit heavy deck where you could be assured that you would draw 3 or 4 recruits in the future, and if you got more than that, then you would get more than the average bronze tier resource. This is a hard card to use, and not one that I've seen used effectively, not one that I'm really sad to see my opponent play. It's kind of a relief that they're not doing anything right away. A lot of the meta is focused on rush decks or very fast decks, which is almost always the case in card games, and so the meta typically revolves around rush decks and counter rush decks. And this doesn't really fall into either category. It's clearly not a rush card, and it also doesn't help you to counter rush decks except maybe slowly over time. I'm not a big fan of it. It's going in the C tier. It's not completely useless, but its best case scenario is not easy to pull off, and in the late game, if there's only a few turns remaining, it's not good. Next up, we have Amazonian Bracers, another buff, though this is for a recruit or a friendly or a hero on the board already. Costs a bronze resource and gives a friendly character aura. Aura protects a friendly target from a spellcast or a action card, as they're called in DC Dual Force. Give a friendly character aura and +4 shields, so some survivability for recruits or a little bit of health for your hero. Most of the action cards from Might are difficult to use well. I don't think I have ever seen Amazonian Bracers played in a game. It's not a card I would typically choose over another strong recruit, because if we compare it to most recruits, if we compared it to something like Antiope or Bibbo Bibowski or Steve Trevor, we get less in stats. We do get aura, but let's compare it to Antiope. Antiope is kind of an above average character, has 3/3 in stats and aura. Amazonian Bracers, so that's 6 stats and aura. Amazonian Bracers gives only 4 in stats and aura, and comes with the caveat that you really have to have a recruit already on the table to take full advantage of it. I guess you can use it on a hero, but I guess it's best case scenario. On a hero, it's barely better than a Batman bandage. Its best case use would be to give a really important character more shields. A character that has an ongoing effect of some kind. A character that you really want to survive, because they will have a devastating effect on the game if they do, and there are some characters like that. Without such a character on the table, this card is going to be fairly low value. It's not a card I've seen before. It's not a card I imagine seeing very often. It's going in the D tier. I'm not a big fan of it. It's almost never going to be included in decks. Next up is the card we were just talking about, Antiope. Antiope for the bronze resource gives 3/3 in stats and aura. It's a good, solid card. I see it included a lot in the kind of early in players' collection as they, well, early in players, let's say DC Dual Force experience, when they're starting to build up their collection and haven't acquired that many good cards yet, because it's a common card and it compares favorably to other common cards. It's going in the B tier. It's a character that will get included in a lot of decks as you're sort of growing your collection, but as you gain better and better cards, it'll get swapped out for other things. It doesn't really... It doesn't get a slot in my decks anymore, but it used to quite often before I got some better cards. So I like this card a little bit. The aura is nice, though this does die immediately to Batman's hero power or Wonder Woman's hero power, so its value is limited. But it is above average. I like it a little bit. Bibbo Bibowski. For the bronze resource, you get guard, which means he has to be attacked first, unless the opponent has hunter on a character. Deploy if you have a recruit with shield, draw a card, and you get 2/2 in stats. That's not bad value. I include this character in a lot of decks. I would consider him a good solid B+, A- tier character. I've started cutting him more recently as I've acquired more cards, and I think that will often be the case. He does not have the value of like a Minotaur or Superman robot, and it's not always easy to actually get his ability off, because you don't always have a recruit with a shield available to play with him, or recruits with shields tend not to keep their shields for very long once they're on the board. So it's not always easy to get his deploy ability off, and without his deploy ability, he's pretty mediocre. I like him a little bit more than Antiope, but not much, and I don't think he will get included in that many decks going forward, because he's a little bit less useful than other cards that might fit in that slot. Big Barda. Costs a gold resource, 6/10 in stats, nothing more complicated than that. This card is a card that you include, again, as you're building the collection, and then you swap it out for better cards. The gold slot is extremely competitive in decks, because there are, well, you're going to have the fewest gold cards of any resource slot. Typically when I'm building decks, I'll build 20 to 24 bronze and 10 to 14, somewhere in that neighborhood, silver, and then 6 or 7 gold, something like that. So the gold slots are hotly contested, and Big Barda just doesn't really do that much. You'll include her maybe as you're building your collection, but then quickly swap her out for other things, for ultimate tier cards, or for legendary tier cards, or even for rare tier cards like Swamp Thing. So Big Barda is going in the maybe C+, let's say C-, D+ tier, because she will get included, but very quickly will be swapped out, as she just doesn't do that much. Blue Devil costs a bronze resource, has the ability start, generate a silver resource, and lose this ability. 3-1 in stats. That start ability is very difficult to get off because he only has 1 HP, so he dies immediately to a Batarang, and Batman is probably the most popular hero in the game at the moment, and so you almost never get this ability off. I've seen him played a few times. I've never seen anyone actually get the start ability off, so most of the time all you get is 3-1 in stats, and a lot of the time he just dies to a Batman gadget, which gives you negative value. He's not good. He rarely gets included, going in the D tier. You could play him and at the same time use Wonder Woman's buff to give him a little bit more survivability. Even so, it's not easy to get start abilities off in general. And if you did get this ability off, it's actually not that common to need an extra silver resource. Typically in our mulligan, we prioritize bronze first. I would say you'd like to have 2 bronze cards at least in your hand, and so a lot of times if you have 2 or 3 silver cards in your hand, you mulligan 1 or 2 of them. Recently I've been keeping 1 silver card in my hand, and I like that. I used to go for all bronze, but I like keeping 1 silver card in my hand. And that means you can't always rely on having a silver card to play every time that you have a silver resource available. And so generating an extra silver resource, it's actually kind of rare that you could take advantage of that. And that's another reason why I don't really like Blue Devil. Courage, a rare card, it costs a silver resource. Your recruits with 5 attack or more are invincible this turn. Well, so if we're running approximately 10 to 14 silver cards, those slots are pretty hotly contested as well. Not as hotly contested as the gold resource slots, but recently I've noted that there are some pretty strong silver cards that we don't have room for in a lot of decks, just because there are a number of them that are pretty good and not a lot of slots available. Courage doesn't make the cut, really ever. Recruits with 5 or more are invincible this turn, functionally equivalent to giving your recruits a shield. Crypto grants a shield to 1 recruit, any recruit that you choose. He only costs a bronze, and you get another 1/1 with a shield. I can't imagine Courage ever being good unless you were already in a dominating position on the board. The fact that it makes only recruits with 5 attack or more is another negative against it. If it said all recruits, I probably still wouldn't run it. I don't think this card is good at all. I think it's pretty bad. It's very difficult to get enough value out of it that you would justify putting this in your deck instead of another silver tier recruit, of which there are a few really strong ones in Might. So I think this would be pretty far down the list of cards that you'd want to include from the silver tier. Down but not out. Costs a silver resource, give your damaged character's shield. Even more niche than Courage, don't like it. Very, very difficult to justify playing this over another silver recruit. And it's possible that there will be combos in the future that deliberately damage your own characters, and then you could combo this in. Even so, it's hard to imagine setting that up well. For now, this is not a good card. Dual Force. Charge your leaders twice for a gold resource. The gold slots are so hotly contested that I think I've seen this played once or twice. It's kind of a relief to see it over another strong gold recruit. This is, you would need a really, really strong combo set up around your hero's abilities in order to make this a strong card. It's another D tier card. I don't think it's good. Don't think it's good at all. So far, early in the alphabet, these are some fairly weak cards. Not ones that you'll see very often in games, and there's pretty good reasons for that. Favor of the Gods, draw a card, then give a random recruit in your hand +2/+2 in guard. Well, at least it's always useful. Drawing a card is fine. So you throw this away, you draw a card, and then you give a random recruit +2/+2 in guard. That can be devastating if it lands on the right recruit, but you don't control which recruit it lands on. Unless your hand size is small and you only have one recruit in your hand. It's going in the C tier. I've seen it used, and you kind of dread that maybe it fell on something that's going to be really hard to deal with if you're facing it, but it's mediocre, and most of the time I would have other cards that I'd want to fit in that slot. It's pretty niche, and it could fall on a recruit that just, it doesn't really do that much. At least it does draw a card, though. Replaces itself, and that's something. In the right context, it can be quite good. So it's not useless. I just haven't seen it work and work well that often. In fact, I don't think I've seen it played, and it struck me as mediocre when it was. Flex Mentallo costs a bronze resource. The first time Flex Mentallo's attack increases on your turn, create a bronze action in your hand. Well, if you can reliably increase Flex Mentallo's attack on your turn, this is pretty decent. The problem is that that's hard to do because the way that you would typically do that is by playing another action that buffs your recruits. There isn't a hero that does this that I can think of off the top of my head, at least. Wonder Woman buffs shields, but not attack. Is there a hero that could buff Flex Mentallo? No, there isn't. So you have to use an action, and the problem with using actions to do it is you don't really want to play a lot of actions that could buff his attack, because if you do, and you draw the actions at the wrong time, and you don't actually have a recruit to play it on, then the actions are pretty bad. They're just a blank card. You get in situations a lot in the late game where you're top decking, and if you top deck an action at that time that you don't have a use for, you're going to lose. So it's hard to justify putting the actions in the deck, and that means if you play Flex Mentallo and then the actions that would buff him, you're going to be very draw dependent, and the deck will just wind up being a dud some of the time. More of the time than if you play more reliable cards. So I've never seen anybody get a Flex Mentallo playoff. I don't think this card is good. It's another D tier card. I'd say it's D tier. Pretty much completely useless. I mean, you could make an argument for C tier because maybe it could be good if you could get that attack increase off reliably, but I just don't see a way to do that in a deck that's any good. Hammer Throw costs a silver resource. Deal damage to an enemy recruit equal to the attack of your highest attack recruit. I've seen this used effectively. It's not easy to set it up for high damage. You can't do it reliably, but you can do it. It's going in the C tier. Not easy to set up, but I have seen it used to good effect when combined with like a Batwing or something in a big play. Never a card you're going to be real happy to see in the opening hand. And so these silver resources are really, really important. The first silver resources that you get, it's really important to have a strong play that you can go to the board with. I would consider this functionally equivalent to like the tactics card that reduces attack to 0, which I've used a little bit, though Hammer Throw is a little more niche than that because you won't always be able to use it that effectively. So from time to time it's good. I think it's better to include other silver recruits though. It just isn't quite reliable enough. Hawkgirl. Costs a silver resource. After Hawkgirl is affected by a friendly action, draw a card. Well, you can use her with Batman, and Batman has the ability to give a bandage that can heal, so you could get her affected by a friendly action that way. A lot of the might cards really want you to set up your recruits and then buff them. That's like the theme of the might faction, and we don't typically play it that way very often, but that is the theme. If you are playing a lot of actions that buff your characters, Hawkgirl provides decent value. The 4/4 in stats is okay. The drawing a card is good. But again, the play recruits and then buff them strategy is only reliable if you draw your cards in exactly the right order, and that makes those decks unreliable. So Hawkgirl's going in the C tier. Can be decent when you get the cards in exactly the right order. Can also be kind of disastrous when you don't. There just isn't enough card draw in the game to play decks like that and have them be reliable. The card draw is so limited that every single draw is... It's crucial that every single card that you draw be playable almost right away, or maybe next turn. And if you draw cards that aren't playable right away, or that are playable far off in the future, you're probably going to lose. And that's what happens when you play friendly action-oriented decks. Hawkman. After Hawkman is affected by a friendly action, he gets +2/+2. Same story. You can use the Batman bandages on him to give him +2/+2. That's really strong. If you can get a friendly action on him, it can be devastating. One of the other issues with friendly actions is that if you use the card Arrest from the Tactics faction to return a recruit to hand, they lose all the buffs that you've given them. They return to their base state. That makes recruits a very hard counter to anything that gives buffs. And Arrest is pretty commonly played. I see it in most Tactics decks. And so if you set up like Hawkman with a Thanagarian Mace or something like that to buff him, and then somebody arrests, you've just spent 2 cards, your opponent spent 1. It's devastating. It's absolutely devastating. And probably too big a risk. Even if we could rely on drawing the friendly actions exactly when we wanted to, Arrest hard counters them. Now, if your cards kept their if your cards kept their stats from the friendly actions when they return to your hand, okay, that would at least remove one of the problems with them. But as of right now, they don't. I wish they did, but they don't. And so Hawkman is also going in the C tier, though higher up the C tier, because he can be quite devastating if you do get the friendly actions on him in the right order. Hurl into the Stratosphere. Costs a gold resource. Put an enemy recruit into your opponent's deck. So it doesn't destroy them, but it does deal with them for a while, probably. I mean, potentially they could sometimes just draw it again immediately, but on average, it'll take them a while to get the card back. Well, it helps you deal with a big problem. I'd prefer to deal with a big problem by playing a big problem of my own. But big problems of your own typically are like legendary or ultimate tier, and when you're new to the game, you may not have access to those. This card's okay. Can be used effectively, but I'd prefer to play big problems of my own. Even something like Swamp Thing, I would prefer over Hurl into the Stratosphere. On an empty board, or when you're ahead, this is just not good. It doesn't do anything. You'd like cards that help you when you're behind, and cards that help you when you're ahead to stay ahead or get further ahead. Hurl into the Stratosphere is only really good when you're behind or even. Jimmy Olsen. It's free. It's a 0-2 with shield. It's quite clearly intended to follow the theme of the Might faction, which is to play recruits and then buff them with friendly actions. The issue is, if you play Jimmy Olsen and then you play a friendly action to buff him, and your opponent arrests him, then you've spent 2 cards to their 1, and it's devastating. If you play Jimmy Olsen and you don't happen to have a friendly action, the opponent kills him for free, and you've lost a little card advantage. I don't think this card is good. I've seen him played, though, a fair amount of the time, and he does combo with things like Bibbo, Bibowski, or Lois Lane. He combos with effectively. I'd put him in like the low B tier, maybe high C tier, but low B tier. He does have uses. If you're playing a Lois Lane, you probably want to include every shield card that you can. I don't know, C+, B-, I would say for Jimmy Olsen. I tried him out a little bit. Found that my decks would fall off faster when I was playing him. And the perfect situation for him just doesn't happen often enough. Kong Keenan. Costs a silver resource, has aura. 7/1 stats. If you have a character with shield, Kong Keenan gets shield as well. He can be quite hard to deal with if you have a character with shield already. The 7/1 with the aura, it means he doesn't immediately die to a Batarang. He may take 2 or 3 Batarangs to kill him. Opponent may have to trade something into him. I like this card. I think he's good. I'd put him in the A tier. I probably would put Bibbo in the low A tier as well, but I've seen Kong Keenan used to devastating effect. If you don't have a character with shield already, he may belong in the high B tier, low A tier, because he can be hit or miss. At least he doesn't require that he'll still eat a Batarang before he dies, even if you don't have a character with shield, but the opponent can just trade something weak into him in that circumstance. So if you have a character with shield already, he's quite devastating. Pretty similar to Bibbo, though he provides even higher value than Bibbo, which he should because he's silver resource and Bibbo is bronze. But he's probably like the 4th best silver recruit in Might, and so he doesn't get included in a lot of decks. But if I didn't have the top 3 silver recruits, I would definitely include Kong, and I have included him before, and I've seen him used and it was very difficult to deal with him when he's used perfectly. Next up we have Crypto. Crypto costs a bronze resource. Crypto has a shield, and Crypto gives another friendly character shield and has 1/1 in stats. So he gets 2 shields on the board for pretty cheap cost. He's always useful because he can give the shield to a hero if he needs to. I like this card a lot. He's going in the A tier. I include him in pretty much every Might deck that I make. I don't think I've included him in every single deck, but pretty much every deck. I like him. He's good. He may even be like low S tier, high A, low S tier. I think he's really, really strong. Works well with cards like Bibbo, works well with Lois Lane, works well with Kong. He can help a hero out if you need to have your hero trade into something big. Very good card. I like it a lot. Lasso of Truth. Move an enemy recruit and exhaust it. I tried it. I didn't like it. It's not entirely useless. It's another kind of C tier action. You could use it to get at something that's behind, and most of the time we're looking to clear the board. That's kind of like a rush strategy, moving an enemy recruit out of the way and then killing something that's behind it. Most of the time we're looking to clear the board, so the situations where we really want to move an enemy recruit aren't that common. But it can happen from time to time. I've used it before in a situation where I really needed to do that. I think it was a situation where I was just ignoring like a low attack character the entire game, and then eventually I moved it out of the way because it was guarding a hero, and that made that card like entirely useless. So I've seen it used, but that situation isn't very common. A lot of the time, this just isn't very useful, and you'd rather have a bronze recruit to help you establish a solid board state. Lead from the front costs a gold resource. Give a friendly leader +5 attack this turn and swap them to the space in front of them. Boy, for a gold resource, that's a hard sell. Why would you ever want a friendly leader in the front row? Well, you could then use the back row to protect something big. I think most of the time if my opponent swapped one of his leaders to the front row, I'd be pretty happy about it. I don't think this card is good at all. A +5 attack for the turn is nice, but the swapping them to the front seems like a negative most of the time. There may be occasionally a time when you've got a recruit that you want them to protect, but yeah, I don't think that's good. That's not going in many decks. I've never seen it used before. I think there's pretty good reasons for that. Next up, we have Lois Lane. Costs a bronze resource. The first time you deploy a recruit with shield, each turn, draw a card and charge your Superman leader. Devastating if you can get it off twice. Pretty good if you can get it off once. You can't always. Lois is going in the A tier, behind Crypto. She makes a case for being included in a Superman deck, but you probably have to include every available shield card if you do. And that means something like Jimmy Olsen, or else you have to accept that Lois isn't always going to be useful. If you draw her in the late game when you're top decking, you probably won't be very happy to see her. So, not S tier, but she can be used to devastating effect. I've seen it, where I was internally panicking because I couldn't immediately deal with her in the back row, and the opponent was playing shield cards, and she had a strong effect on the board state, so she can, and it's not unlikely. It isn't going to happen every time, but she's pretty good when you get her off in the right circumstances in a Superman deck. When you get her effect off a couple of times, that can be pretty strong. So, good card. Solid A tier card. Ma and Pa Kent. Bronze resource, give your leaders +2 shields. I get where they're coming from with this. It is a repeatable effect if you could protect it. The issue is it's not that important to give your heroes extra shields or heals most of the time, unless they're in dire straits. And if they're in dire straits, you're probably in the late game and you're hoping for silver or bronze resources and not on Pa Kent. I've seen it played a few times. I haven't seen it used effectively. And a lot of the times it just dies for nothing. So I don't think this card is good. It's going in the C tier. Like mid C tier, I would say. Not going to be included that often. And hard to get high value out of it when you do include it. Metamorpho. Silver resource. After you play a recruit with 5 attack or more, Metamorpho gets +2/+2. Well, has 3/3 in stats. Steel from the Might faction has 5/6 in stats and guard as well, and we don't have to do anything to get him to that point. So if you played Metamorpho and then you played 1 5 attack recruit, that would only get him to 5/5. He's still worse than Steel, so you'd have to play 2 5 attack recruits to get him to 7/7, which would be very strong. That means keeping him alive for a turn, and it's not easy to keep recruits alive for a turn. It not only does it mean keeping him alive for a turn, but it means you have to have multiple 5 attack recruits in your hand to back him up. That situation's not that common. It's like a low B tier card. It will cause panic in your opponent. If it stays on the board, it can become a problem. You can make it decent on the turn that you play him at least. with the right combination of cards, but you do need the right combination of cards, and if you just play him straight up without anything else, he's not very good. He's not really the silver card that you want on the turn that you have silver bronze, because bronze recruits with 5 attack are not very common. So he's more of like a silver silver or a gold silver type of play. And you can't always reliably get off silver silver or gold silver plays because you're mulliganing, prioritizing bronze first so that you have things to play in your early turns, and then you have to rely on drawing silver or gold cards later, and you can't always rely on drawing those cards because the majority of your deck is going to be bronze to ensure that you don't just do nothing in the early game. So Metamorpho, pretty inconsistent, but has the potential to be devastating when used exactly correctly. But he is outclassed by a number of silver resource recruits, including Kong Keenan, in my opinion. Nubia costs a gold resource, has 7/7 in stats and aura. Simple card, not bad. Not bad. Falls into the category of going to get cycled out as soon as better cards become available. But she's not bad. She can go in the B tier. It would be a card that we give a serious look at when we're new to the game and don't have anything better to include. Certainly not useless. Now, would you include her or Big Barda? I guess that's debatable. I like the aura. I prefer the aura. So Big Barda gives you 16 in stats. Nubia gives you 14. But you get the aura. So is the aura worth 1/1? I think so. I think the aura is worth 1/1. At least. And if the opponent doesn't have the right card to use, if he's trying to kill Nubia using actions and doesn't have the right card to burn the aura, it could be worth even more than 1/1. So I think this card is better than Big Barda, but it's debatable. Queen Hippolyta. Okay, now we're talking. This would be number 3 in the recruits in the silver tier in the Might faction, and as such she gets included in a lot of decks. Almost every deck that I build, I would say, that includes Might. Queen Hippolyta has aura, 4/5 in stats, and gives your other recruits +1/+1, so she can easily boost herself up to 5/6 at least, potentially higher. Makes her one of the best silver tier recruits. I like her a lot. I think this card is really strong. High A tier, possibly S. Possibly S, but she is like the 3rd best silver recruit, so I don't think she's S tier, but very high A tier. Very strong card that I like a lot, and I've lately been including her in pretty much every Might deck that I make. Steel. This card is incredible value. He's a 5/6 in stats. That is, it might be, I'll have to check on this, but it might be the highest statted S tier card, at least the base stats. Not S tier card, the highest statted silver resource card. There's Giganta, who's a 7/7 but forces you to discard a card. There's the Copperhead that is 7/4. I think Steel's got the best base stats of any silver resource card, and he has guard. This card is going in every single Might deck for a long time. He's really, really good. He's, in my opinion, the best silver resource card in Might. One of the best in the game. And may even be so strong that he needs a nerf. I think given that he has guard, he could probably be like a 4/6 or even a 4/5. And still be good and playable. So he's probably too strong as he is. He's really good. Card you're really never going to be sad to draw, and should always be included in my decks, in my opinion. Steve Trevor. So now we're getting into the more serious cards. Steve Trevor costs a bronze resource and has deploy, charge a friendly leader. Comes with 2-3 stats, another S tier card, should get included in every Might deck. So what's the value of that charge a leader? Well, it depends on which leader you're charging. If you're charging Wonder Woman, she gives you 4 attack and +1 in stats to your recruits. That's typically 1 or 2 recruits. Let's say it's 2. Then the value of charging Wonder Woman would be 2 attack for 1 turn and an additional 2 shields. That would functionally make Steve Trevor, or an additional 1 shield, because it's like 2 typically per usage of the hero power. So let's say he's like a 2-4 plus 2 attack for 1 turn. That's very strong value for a bronze resource. Or if you use him with Superman, it's like 2.33 attack. If you use him with Aquaman, it's 1 attack plus some stats from the recruit that he summons, which is typically like, I don't know, 10 in stats. So that'd be like 1 attack for a turn and then another 3.33 stats or something like that. Steve Trevor is really, really good. I think I would include him in every Might deck, pretty much without exception. Super Strength. Give a friendly recruit +3/+3. Gets played fairly regularly. It's one of the best of the action buffs. I see it tried a lot. I've tried it myself. It's good when you have a friendly recruit to play it on and then that recruit doesn't get arrested or dealt with by like a single action card. If the opponent has to use 2 cards to deal with the 2 cards that you've played, it's pretty good. If the opponent can deal with the 2 cards that you've played with just 1 card, it's pretty bad. And that does happen quite often. So I don't think it's very good. It does have its uses, in particular with shielded characters. But the times that it gets dealt with by your opponent using just 1 of their cards, that hurts a lot. And results in your opponent having hand advantage, card advantage over you, results in you running out of resources before your opponent does, and then contributes to you losing the game. So it's not useless. It does have uses. It's going in the B tier. You just have to draw things in exactly the right order. Be able to establish a board presence, and then you can use this to pretty good effect. But only sometimes. Superboy. My second favorite silver resource recruit from the Might sphere. He's also going in the S tier. I include him in every Might deck that I play. Very strong, 4/4, and shield. Nothing complicated, works every time. Combos with Lois, combos with Kong Keenan or Bibbo, potentially. And not easy to deal with. Requires a Batarang and like a Wonder Woman attack, or a Batarang and somebody has to trade into him. If opponent doesn't have that card, Batarang, it can get kind of inefficient dealing with a 4/4 with a shield. So he's a strong play. I like him a lot, and I include him in every Might deck. Supergirl. Costs a gold resource, has shield. Has deploy, give another friendly recruit with shield 5/5. And she has 5/5 in stats, so she can get up to 10/10. The issue is that combo is not super easy to get off. So most of the cards that you have with shield are early game plays. We've got Jimmy Olsen, we've got Superman Robot, we've got Crypto, we've got Superboy. These all get played as soon as we draw them in the early game, typically. You don't really hold on to those characters hoping that you'll draw Supergirl. You wouldn't really do that. Because a lot of the time, any single card in your deck, or any 2 cards, they're not going to come up every game. There's not enough card draw for that. They'll typically come up every 3 or 4 games. So you're not going to hold on to a card in your hand hoping that you'll draw a card from your deck, because a lot of the time that just won't happen and you will have held on to the card for nothing. So the only time you can get the Supergirl combo off is if you've already got a Supergirl in your hand, and then you draw another shield while you're waiting to play her, or you had her in your opening hand, which is not desirable. And then you can hang on to her with the shielded recruit until you can play her. It's not reliable to be able to play her on curve with another friendly recruit with shield. If you can, the 10/10 in stats is pretty good, though it still falls short of a character like Highfather, who gives you the stats without the requirement that you wait or get a combo down. But it's like it kind of strikes me as like a discount ultimate card, which maybe is the role it's intended to fill. There are other cards that give you stats like Supergirl would, but without requiring the combo. Supergirl rewards you for the combo with the shield as well. I wouldn't play this very often. In fact, almost never. I think she's going in the C tier. It's really hard to get that combo off. If you can, it's really good. But from the gold resource cards, we want to include things that are like Superman. Would you ever include Supergirl over Superman? No, no, no. I don't think so. Would you include Supergirl over Truth and Justice? I don't think so. Would you include Supergirl over Swamp Thing? I don't think so. Over Wonder Woman? No. So, it's not that she's bad, it's just that there are other better options, and the gold slot is hotly contested. Superman Robot. Superman Robot costs a bronze resource. He's a 2/2 with shield and guard. This card is amazing. He is going in the S tier. I include him in every deck. He's simple. He always works. He combos well with our other cards, similar to Superboy. He can save high value cards from attacks. He'll eat 2 hero powers from time to time. Really good card. I like him a lot. It's one of the core cards of any Might deck. Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing is really strong. Swamp Thing is a gold resource card. He has guard and he has deploy. Swamp Thing gets +2/+2 for each enemy recruit. Comes with 2/5 stats. So if your opponent has 1 recruit, he's a 4/7. If they have 2, he's a 6/9. If they have a full board, he's what? 10/13. Yeah, he can really get up there. Now, he's not as good as the legendary or ultimate gold cards, but until you get those, this is going to be a card that you'll play in a lot of decks. It's like a discount ultimate, and it's in that role, it's really, really good, and it can really save you and win some games. It's like very high A tier, potentially S tier. S tier compared to the other common and rare cards for sure. It's just not S tier compared to other gold resource cards, which is what it has to compete with. But it's really, really strong. I've seen it single-handedly win games, like multiple times. It can really save you from a bad situation. This card is very, very strong. Very, very strong. The antithesis of rush decks. So I like it a lot, and you could make a strong case for it being S tier. I don't think it is because it doesn't get included in every deck, just because the gold slot is so hotly contested, and that's where a lot of the ultimate and legendary rarity cards live. But until you get those cards, Swamp Thing will get included in a lot of decks. Thanagarian Mace. Probably terrible pronunciation. It's a free card that gives a friendly recruit +2/+1. The issue is the same as with all other actions. It's a B tier card, but the issue is if it can be dealt with by a single card, if your opponent can deal with your 2 cards with 1 single card, then you're in a rough spot. And that happens a lot with a card that only buffs a friendly recruit by 1 health. 1 health isn't enough. This should probably be +2/+2. Super Strength is +3/+3. The free version could be +2/+2, or it could be +1/+2, and it would be better and more playable. It's not, so it's low B tier. I tried it out. It can help you get off to a strong start. It can also just be straight up bad. So that and Super Strength are the best action cards in my opinion, in the best buff action cards in the common and rare tier cards. Truth and Justice is better from the ultimate tier cards or the rare or the legendary tier cards, but those 2 are decent. And if you were going to play an action deck, you would definitely include those 2. I don't think the action decks are very strong right now. Thanagarian Minotaur. Probably terrible pronunciation again. It's simple. All it does is 3-4 in stats. Similar to Steel, though, those stats are very, very good for its resource cost. In fact, I don't know that you can find better among the bronze resource cards anywhere in the game. Batman can't take it out with one attack. Wonder Woman can, but if you're playing it in a Wonder Woman deck and you buff it, then Wonder Woman can't. This is a very good card. It's very hard to deal with, just based on its stats alone, and it goes in every deck, every Might deck for that reason. It's very good for a bronze resource card, even though it doesn't provide any ability at all. It's just straight up power and shields. Throne of Atlantis. Create 2 sea creatures in your hand. It's not bad. With Aquaman, it provides additional value. And I've had internal debates with myself about whether to include Throne of Atlantis or Queen Hippolyta. This is like a card that's I've cycled out of my personal meta because the meta right now is so rush oriented, and this is a slower card. It doesn't give you anything right away. You draw 2 sea creatures and you can only play one of them that turn. I prefer more immediate value in a rush oriented meta, and it's probably always going to be rush oriented because players always gravitate toward rush decks in card games. Nearly always. And even in a game that's relatively unfriendly to rush decks, that's what players are still gravitating towards. So when I saw that happening, I kind of cycled Throne of Atlantis out of my personal meta. But in a more control-oriented meta, I think this card goes up in value. And it's good in an Aquaman deck. Is it good in other decks? Definitely less so. But in an Aquaman deck, it's good. And could be used if you haven't gotten a hold of Superboy or Steel or Queen Hippolyta yet. If you're playing Aquaman. And should the meta cycle more toward control, this card will go up in value. Trial of the Amazons. Enemy recruits with 4 attack or less can't protect this turn. It's a rush card in a faction that's not rush oriented, in a game that's not really rush oriented, though players are still trying to play it that way a lot. I don't think this is good at all. Going in the D tier. Never seen it played before. Can't imagine wanting to. For a silver resource. Using this in a silver resource slot over Steel or Superboy or Queen Hippolyta or even Throne of Atlantis or Kong Keenan or even Metamorpho? No, I wouldn't do it. I don't think this is good at all. Even Hammer Throw I'd rather have. Hawkman. Yeah. Not good, in my opinion. Truth and Justice we've already talked about. That is a legendary card. Up, up, and away. Bronze resource. Give your recruits with shield +4 attack this turn. Too niche. You have to have a recruit with shield and you have to have them survive with their shield intact. That just isn't going to happen. And if it does happen, you're probably winning already. If you're in a board state where you can get a shielded recruit to survive, then you might not even need the 4 attack that turn. This is very, very niche. Its best case scenario is very, very niche. Never seen it used, and yeah, I don't think it's good. I get what it's trying to do, but I don't think it's good. It's trying to help you get a strong trade up with one of your recruits, but hard to set up. Very hard to set up. Warlord. Warlord costs a bronze resource. Comes with 5/1. I don't think this card is good because it dies to a single Batarang. If you're playing Wonder Woman, it gets a little better if you play it on the turn where you're buffing. But it's still relatively easy for your opponent to trade with any 2 attack character, so I don't think it's entirely useless. But I guess if we're putting Blue Devil in the D tier, this should probably go similar to B. to Blue Devil. Now, if Batman falls out of the meta, becomes bad or something, or the Batarang disappears, this card will be improved in value. It still dies to every hero power attack. So it'll deal damage at the cost of card advantage. And I probably wouldn't even play it if Batarang didn't exist in the meta. If it had speed, maybe. Maybe if it had speed, it could attack right away, maybe. But without it, I don't think this is a very useful card. Wildcat. Wildcat costs a bronze resource, has 3/3 in stats, and gives another friendly recruit +1/+1. It's good. It's a solid A tier card. It has been losing out to other cards lately for me, because we're running like Steve Trevor, Superman Robot, the Minotaur, Crypto, and then do we run Wildcat? Do we run Antiope? We've already got 8 bronze cards, so we have maybe 1 slot left. And there are cards like Clark Kent that we also want to include. And so Wildcat doesn't get, what does get included sometimes, and it's 4/4 in value, is okay. It's roughly comparable to like Antiope, with maybe a little bit more useful, though I probably would include Bibbo over it in a lot of cases. So we could make a case that it's more B tier, or that Bibbo is like more A tier. The more I think about Bibbo, the more I think he's probably more A tier, because I'd include him over Wildcat. And you could make an argument for or against Lois Lane in a Superman deck, so roughly comparable to Bibbo. And you could have a debate with yourself about which one to include. I think Wildcat is a little bit better. Yeah, I'd say that's probably where they fall. That looks better to me. And last but not least, Yara. Yara Floor costs a gold resource, has Aura reduce Yara's cost for each friendly recruit with 5 attack or more. She has 5/5 in stats. If you can get her set up as costing a silver resource, well, let's say she did cost a silver resource, how would she compare to Superboy? Superboy has 4/4 with shield, Yara has 5/5 with aura. Would I rather have Superboy or Yara with a silver resource? Pretty debatable. Would I rather have Yara or Steel, 5/5 with aura or 5/6 with guard? I'd rather have Steel. So even if you could guarantee that Yara's cost would be reduced, she'd be strong, not a slam dunk. If you could discount her by 2, then she's amazing. But if you could discount her by 2, you probably wouldn't need to, because to get 2 recruits out with 5 attack or more, you're probably going to need your silver resources. You'd probably be into the phase where you're generating 2 silver resources before you would need Yara to cost 1 bronze resource. I've never seen her played. Theoretically, I think she's probably B tier. If you can reliably discount her to silver, you could elevate her to A tier, like reliably meaning nearly all the time, but it's not so easy to do, so I'd say she's B tier. So that's our tier list. The Might faction is very strong, with Steel, Steve Trevor, Superboy, Superman Robot, and the Minotaur at the top. And you've got strong supporting cards: Swamp Thing, Queen, Hippolyta, Crypto, Lois Lane. Might's in a good place. It's not the best faction, that would be Tactics, but it's in a very good place. I'd say it's the second best faction in my estimation. So that's our Might tier list for the common and rare tier cards. And thank you for watching.